How's my? Okay, my good side is actually my left, so this is not an ideal setup for me.
Mine's my ass, so.
Todd Bryant is an award-winning creative technologist who works across independent art installations, commercial activations, and academia as a director of production and adjunct professor in the Integrated Design and Media program at NYU's Tadon School of Engineering. He's globally recognized as a leading video artist, engineer, and an educator with expertise in storytelling through mixed reality and experiential installations. His cutting-edge work and curricula include extensive projects in virtual production, motion capture, project mapping, and spatial media experiences. He has provided technical direction for projects that have been installed and exhibited at, among many other places, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Burning Man, Brooklyn Academy of Music, and Celebrate Brooklyn, as well as the immersive program at leading film festivals such as Cannes, Sundance, and Tribeca. Todd has also worked with Snapchat, HBO's Game of Thrones, Childish Gambino, Nike, Norwegian Cruise Lines, Campari, Jose Cuervo. How do you say that?
Jose Cuervo.
Okay, Jose Cuervo.
It's tequila.
And AGCO, and create new and exciting platforms for audience engagement. His contributions and works have been awarded the Outstanding Visual Effects in a Special Venue project by the Visual Effects Society and the Cannes Silver Lions. Additionally, he has developed a number of comprehensive technical mixed reality and motion capture curricula. Among them, Amusement Park prototyping, virtual production development, Worlds on the Wire, narrative storytelling, virtual reality, and bodies in motion. Todd graduated with a Bachelor of Science from Emory. I'll restart that part. It's really long.
Yeah, you're starting off with a big mouthful. Yeah.
It's really long. Todd graduated with a Bachelor of Science from Emory University and a master's degree at NYU's Interactive Telecommunications program. He's currently running NYU Tandon at the Yard, NYU's premier emerging media center dedicated to virtual production curriculum and research and development.
And all that in 8 years.
All that in 8 years.
Yeah.
So, hey, Todd.
Hey, how's it going?
Welcome to the WLab'ing Podcast.
It feels great to be here. I feel like I've been here before, actually.
Really? Oh, okay. So Todd is actually the director of the space. So thank you so much for letting us be here.
Hey, thanks for hanging out.
Okay. So I'm just going to go right into it.
Sure.
What sparked your interest in creative technology, and how did you start your journey into this field?
So it's actually just by being in New York City, you see some of the worst of the worst, but you also see some of the best. And I was just seeing, concerts. I was young, working in market research. I had a master's in film theory, so I was doing a lot of trailer testing for movies and pilot testing for TV shows. So I was tangentially associated with content creation. But I was, going out and seeing crazy shows in the evening, and you have people who are just VJing live visuals. I said, who does that? Where do you learn how to do that? What is that? And I just saw the people that were doing it, and like, those people look like me. And I just asked them, how did you guys learn how to do this, and where do you get jobs doing this? They say, we went to NYU. And they said, we went to NYU Interactive Telecommunications program. So I started the journey of going there. Initially, I went to study data visualization because I was coming from a market research background.
Right.
So it was about interactive visualizations of stuff to make PowerPoint's more interesting.
Okay.
But I fell in love with game engines, light and shadow, moving in real time. Started working with a projection mapping company called Light Harvest Studio, and then immediately, was making content for the Norwegian Cruise Lines, for a dome projection show, for Burning Man. I remember that the day I graduated, we were at Radio City Music Hall. And in the basement, while we were in line, I saw an ad for the Norwegian Cruise Lines that I just installed my stuff on. And I was like, okay, it's like a sign that I'm doing the right thing and I'm in the right place. So after I graduated, which was 2014, I just started, I saw my student loans, and instead of trying to be an artist, I immediately became a mercenary. So I would go in and fix projects. I became known as the fixer. And I'd walk around the halls of the New Museum Incubator and other tech art places and just try to pitch in and help people deliver their content to festivals and install in spaces. So what happened was that by not being around for a lot of the conceptual development, just coming in for the execution, I was able to get a lot of projects on my portfolio very quickly because I didn't have to do all the project development that usually takes the longest amount of time. Fundraising and script writing and all that kind of stuff, I was able to just come in and just build the project itself and deploy it. So I was able to get a lot of exposure and meet a lot of people really quickly, and that kind of accelerated me to being a known tech director or tech producer in the space.
Wow. So that's really quick how you became from a data visualization, what do you call it? A data...
Like a market researcher.
A market researcher to a creative technologist. What was that process like, transitioning from?
It was a lot more fun. Okay. So I had a job already while I was in grad school for market research. My sister and I actually had a company together that we'd started in 2010 when the iPad came out, and kids were learning how to read in an accelerated rate. And we did market research for like PBS and Hasbro and around just kids and learning and reading and stuff. We did a lot of educational applications, but it was not as cool as I'd wanted to be when I was 16. I wanted to do cooler things. So by changing, it was very easy just to basically it was more fun. I just got to follow my whims and just decide what I wanted to do. And VR came out in 2016, and I was able to dive into that with motion capture at the same time. And it was easy just to forget about all the other stuff. But the market research was a good background to have because I understood both qualitative and quantitative research. And what's fun about working with game engines is that you can change your stuff whenever you want to, right? That's the whole point of virtual production, right? That you can alter it, you can change your main character at the very last second, and it propagates through the entire project. Well, when I was going to places like Sundance, I was able to do both eye tracking to see what people were noticing. I was able to do qualitative stuff by talking to people. And I was able to adjust my projects every night based off of my little research I was doing with people. And that became like a real joy of being able to put things out in the world that, when you're at Sundance with a movie, it's edited, it's cut, it's locked. You can't change it. If you get feedback and they all hate one scene, you're like, well, we could fix that maybe later on, but not tonight. But I was able to change things like during a lunch break and make another executable. And so the market research really influenced being able to be able to curate my own taste, to understand what I thought was good and what other people thought was good. I was able to intuit that much easier.
Okay, that's a really interesting way to integrate your existing background into a new area. So speaking of virtual production, right? Could you explain the concept of virtual production to our listener who may not be familiar with it? What makes it such a revolutionary tool in the world of production? In your view, how might it transform the landscape of production?
Right, so virtual production has there's a lot of miscommunication or misunderstanding of what virtual production is. When it first became a hot topic during the pandemic in 2020, people thought that virtual production was making movies wearing VR headsets or something like that. People kept on trying to figure out what it was, but virtual production's been around for 20 years. Virtual production.
20 years.
Yeah, I mean So virtual production. What a lot of people think of virtual production today is they're conflating it with in-camera VFX. In-camera VFX is actually just production. Right, when you hit record, you're making something. It's all the dialing in of settings before you hit record that is the actual virtual production of in-camera VFX. But in-camera VFX have been around for over 100 years because that's just matte paintings, miniature work, right? You're just doing it with a screen now. Hitchcock had rear projection, right, for all his driving scenes, and it was notoriously ill-fitting towards they were taking a left turn, but the footage was going on the right turn.
Yeah.
We've solved that now. We can just hook up an actual steering wheel to the wall, and then when we turn right, it's a video game. It turns right with us, and it's a more effective way of doing this in-camera effects. But so when it comes to in-camera, that's obviously matte paintings and miniatures have been around for a long time. But then what I do, which is mainly mocap, that's been around since. I don't think they had real-time feedback for Lord of the Rings, but starting with 1010, with the Avatar movies, they were able to use virtual cameras in Motion Builder, which is a real-time tool. Might not be photorealistic, but it's a real-time tool, and they're able to peer into this world and do iterations and solve for issues that might be not sussed out until post when you'd have a much more expensive recalculation. So you're able to do all this creative work. The virtual of production is near production, right? You're doing everything before you hit the record button, and you're able to iterate a whole lot more. So the virtual production, there's many flavors of it. It's not just for making movies. I've learned recently from some people I've met at the Disney Imagineering that they do virtual production for rides, right? They have projection map rooms and they visualize rides ahead of time to understand pacing and scale in a virtual way before they start actually, building really expensive cities, which is essentially, like the Avatar World of Pandora, I think employed 40,000 people. And, you want to do as much pre-production before you get, using all those folks. So
right. I get that virtual productions has existed for like over 100 years. Like Hitchcock, you can arguably use virtual production for his films. But what was that one project, in your opinion, that really kickstarted this new era of virtual production?
I mean, that would undeniably be, with doing game engines, it would be The Mandalorian, because it had come out just before the pandemic, and then everyone realized that not only was it a way of effectively making content with more control over, it's always a perfect time of day, it's always the perfect weather, but then it was able to use smaller crews and avoid having to travel, lowering your carbon footprint, all those things, but while using real-time rendering as the quote-unquote final pixel. That would be the modern explosion of virtual production. But if you were going to look back just maybe a few years prior, I would always point out Gravity, which used LED walls but as a lower resolution. They're able to embed the reflection of the Earth and give sight lines to the actors as they were tumbling around in space. So that would be the first use of in-camera LED walls that I could think of that was a major component of it was its own actor in the movie. And then before that, I would point at the Tom Cruise movie Oblivion, which didn't use game engines, but was using projection mapping he was living in an apartment that was all glass, and they couldn't erase all the green screen.
Right.
So they went up to, I think, a mountain in Hawaii, recorded a 360 video, projection mapped the entire studio around there, and then they were able to get everything in camera. So all those clouds and stuff weren't composited later on.
Right. So that is a good use of LED screens to eliminate
the compositing issue.
Right.
Yeah. No green screen. The actors can see things. They're embedded. They're more relaxed. It looks beautiful. There's a whole behind-the-scenes featurette about Oblivion and how beautiful they thought the set was, and how they were really able to not have to imagine being in a sky apartment. And so it helped the actors. It was illuminating the actors. It did all the things that the LED walls did. It just wasn't real time because it was pre-recorded. But I'd say that those two are definitely movies I point out to show the trajectory of moving into doing this stuff, which has only really been available since Epic Games purchased or acquired what's called in-display, which is the deterministic sync between game engines.
Right.
So before that, game engine is something that's supposed to be, going to one screen as high frame rate as possible. And then just around the time of Mandalorian, they were able to come up with a way of treating game engines as media servers. And then once you have that, then you can address the amount of pixels you need for creating an LED scene. But again, they were recording this for a TV show, but this technology had been used for concerts and for theme park rides and that kind of stuff prior as well. But it was just the fact that they were able to do it in real time. And so I was hyper aware of this technology because we used it for our dome show for Childish Gambino, which was the first use of in-display for a blended projection. Before then, it had only been used on TV screens with bezels. It didn't have a seamless image. So we were able to do 5 instances of the same multiplayer game synced together, but it wasn't really ready for prime time just yet. It had been announced, but it really wasn't a deterministic sync where a randomized particle on one computer will seamlessly blend over to the next computer when it crosses over the frustum of the next projector. Right. And so we had to bring in the 2 guys who engineered in-display, and they had to stay with me for 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day for 5 days to actually fix it and make it work for a seamless projection.
Okay, so in simpler terms, what is in-display?
In-display is kind of multiple things. For me, the most important part is that it's a deterministic sync, right? So it is not it's how you get frame lock between different computers so that they are a seamless media server, which is something that's revolutionary for game engines. For most people now, because that's kind of more under the hood, it's a way of configuring what does your display look like. Like you have a 3D model of this curved screen
Right.
in the game engine, and you're placing it in a location so it knows what the origin point is, where you're shooting from, and all that kind of stuff. That's kind of secondary. When we were doing it in its first initial state, it was actually just an XML file, and we had to hard code it with numbers. We didn't have a 3D model that we could put in there.
Yeah, I saw briefly about the Childish Gambino project. It's a really big white dome. Where was that held?
It was an hour outside of Auckland, New Zealand, in a national park.
Right. How did you get connected to that project, and what did you do on it?
So so there's a class at ITP called Big Screens. It's held at the IAC building, which is Vimeo headquarters on the West Side Highway. It was at the time one of the largest screens in North America, and we have a class where we design content for that, and the students more and more wanted to put game engine stuff on it. So I was actually working with some server companies and with the enterprise team at Epic Games to install and display there. So I had been working with Epic Games, and then Childish Gambino came calling, and where it's like, okay, well, instead of doing it for signage, how about I do it for a concert? So we just instead focused our attention on doing it for a 240-foot wide dome, inflatable dome, in a national park in Auckland, New Zealand, which we had 7 weeks to build the content and deploy. But it was, so I'd already been in the working with Epic Games to harness that technology and use it as a seamless blend. And then I had been working with a company called ESI Design, which does a lot of architectural LED installation. And I built out a real-time team that at that agency that were using game engines as previs for their clients. And that team, the team that I've been consulting with, left and had gotten this Childish Gambino gig. They had been involved in a previous concert in 2016 where he had done a smaller scale thing in Unity, and then we were able to win out, and when you want to do it again as a much higher resolution thing. And so it was great. We got Epic Games was behind us. They brought in Weta Digital, so Weta, because it was in New Zealand, Weta did 4 songs, and we did 12 songs, and I was able to tech direct Weta Digital too, which was one of the funnest things I've ever done, to have such an incredibly professional, fun, nice, like caring team. It was fantastic to work with with Weta. They were just like, they have a guy who does explosions and a guy who does just smoke and a person who does just the mocap. It was great to see such specialization.
Pulling in all these different teams and executed a project in 7 days. What was that like?
7 weeks, yeah.
7 weeks.
So I was a visiting professor at IDM. So IDM had just brought me in full time. I was running this space, the NYU Tandon at the Yard, which was known as our lab at that time. And then we got this gig, and I was like, oh crap, this is going to suck. And my heart sunk because I just knew it was going to be way too much work. So they were staging it in a place, I forget where it was in LA, but they had a small scale-sized dome in LA, and I was in New York because I had my responsibilities to NYU.
Were you a fan of Childish Gambino?
Yeah, I mean he's an alum. He's NYU.
Wow.
You know, so
I didn't. I think he should be an RA at Third North.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's a Tisch alum. Yeah. We didn't really interact with him much because he was on tour. This was like a celebration at the finale of his giant world tour. So he really only showed up at the very end, and you know, it was fun. We got to rehearse with him. You know, it was all being live show controlled, so I was able to I have vivid memory of him. We have this one scene where we were flying through the galaxy, and there's lots of weird stories about what we did for the content here, but there's one scene we actually we're flying over hundreds of millions of kilometers through this galaxy that we created, and I had parented everything to a single null actor in the scene so that we explode the galaxy really big, and it just comes and slams down the dome, and he made him flinch, and he hit the deck because he was scared the galaxy was exploding above him. So that was a fun interaction to be able to terrify somebody.
So Todd, you almost killed Childish Gambino.
He was safe. He was safe.
Okay.
Yeah.
How involved was he creatively in that project?
Very. He was. We did a lot of previs. We got, I can't remember the guy's name. We got the storyboard artist from ILM to do the storyboards for the project. So it was all previs, and it was done very faithfully to what was already approved. Yeah. We had a set list that was locked in place. So the whole thing was a seamless experience. It was, I was in charge of the camera work, so every scene, every transition was completely seamless through the entire show, and it was all done to a click track.
Wow. Okay, speaking of installations, I know you've done an installation for Game of Thrones,
Right.
and that went viral on the internet.
So the Game of Thrones one, that was done in 2 weeks. That was pitched at the House of Yes, and then executed within 2 weeks.
Right. For those people who don't know, what stunt did you guys pull?
So we built projector turrets, which is something we had joked about doing for a while. And we mounted 30K lumen projectors on the back of double-decker buses and drove around without permits, flying Drogon the Dragon, projecting it on buildings. It was all for the Season 5 DVD release, so everyone was still happy with Game of Thrones. And they had these different, so basically a week prior to us flying around with the projection turrets, they would have these landing sites. So it'd be like at a mall in LA, someplace else, San Francisco, Herald Square in New York, someplace in Philadelphia, and it would be like, smoke coming out of the ground. You see like some sort of dragon had landed there, and like everything was destroyed. And then it's like, in 1 week, be prepared, they're coming back. And then they would have these events where they would bring in, actors that were in the season, and they would give away DVDs. And then as everyone's at this event, we were driving around the city, and then we'd show up at the venue with our dragon and have the dragon kind of flying around the whole park or wherever it was.
Do you have to get permissions from the residential buildings?
You should, but we didn't. There was no time for that. We basically had a bunch of PAs that were driving cars. That would try to get us parking spots so that we can activate certain iconic landmarks. So we had somebody parked in front of the Opera House in San Francisco, or somebody parked in front of the public library in New York, so that we knew that we have a space for our double-decker bus to do some more activity in front of that location. But yeah, we had no permits. They gave me Drogon, the 3D model in Maya. It was like something like 16,000 textures. Definitely didn't run in real time. That's the company called Pixamoto who makes it. I got in a call with them and said, guys, this is not ready for a game engine. And there was some guy, I forget his name, he was in the background of the call. He's like, I know what you need. And then 2 hours later, he made a game-ready version of Drogon for us. And then I just put it into a third-person template so I could fly the camera around the dragon. And everything was on a PlayStation controller. We had not only the controls for the dragon doing different state machine movements, but we also had things like keystone correction and brightness and contrast, because we had so many different ambient light settings, and we had so many, like the dragon would go up to 20th story and then back down to ground level. So we had a keystone in real time so that the perspective would be corrected as you go up and down.
Oh, okay.
Right? And then as you had more ambient light, you had to add contrast. Certain things were more saturated, so you had to take away saturation. So all those were on the controller, as well as all the different buttons for breathing fire and doing tumbles.
There's a lot of techno shit that goes into it.
Yeah. So that was just like 2 weeks of programming with the dragon, and then I was actually at GDC in San Francisco deploying a VR piece called Giant. And so during the day I was at GDC in Epic Games booth showing Giant, and then in the evening I would then go off and we would do these activations on a double-decker bus.
Imagine getting out of the shower from your beautiful New York City apartment, and then giant dragon just shines into your light and blinds you.
Yeah, 30,000 lumens is dangerous.
How'd you guys not get sued for that?
Did
you guys get sued?
No, maybe we should take down the documentation. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that, I don't know about the shining projectors into windows. It's more about the parking permits that we were worried about. But yeah.
That you learn as a film student.
Yeah.
You can shoot anywhere.
New York City is definitely a ask for forgiveness, not for permission city.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's always DIY, run and gun, which is why it's interesting to have folks like you guys at WLab, like here in New York, trying to level up production, because New York has always been known as scrappy. It's always been cinema verite, and it's great that we are not getting left behind when it comes to virtual production as well, because this is high production value, and we have so many talented, outside of NYU, we have so many other amazing schools. There's so much talent in New York City that it should be able to stay here and create a community here.
I think New York City itself has a very high production value. You can shoot anywhere, it'll look great. But also the problem is the space is so limited, it's so expensive. So that's why I think virtual production studio in a way would thrive in the city. What are your thoughts on that? Virtual production, West Coast, East Coast, what's the industry like?
It's everyone has their own style, and again, we kind of touched upon this earlier on. There's different kinds of virtual production, and there's different, what's great is, yes, we have these amazing sci-fi TV shows that are being done in virtual production that utilize everything to its fullest. But I'm more interested, or not more interested, but I'm also interested in different genres. What does a rom-com look like on an LED wall? What do you do when you put the technology in the hands of artists and innovators? And it's just like VR. We're still trying to figure out what VR is as a medium and what it's good for. And this is also something like, oh yeah, it works really well for this, but in 5 years we'll have another understanding of it based off of innovation done in the space where you can interact with students and artists and the people who are really going to break the boundaries. So I just think it needs to proliferate because more people can develop new things.
What sort of projects, what sort of stories do you think is best suited for virtual production?
I mean, I think we've seen that we can go to crazy locations. So sci-fi makes sense. Why would you want to do virtual production and make it look like the same room you're inside of already?
Right. Or period pieces.
Right. So take us to places that we can't access. So yeah, bending time and space seems to be the most fun. But again, I just think it's anything where you can't travel to that location, where you don't want to, you have national parks that you don't want to ruin, so you can recreate those national parks and you're not hurting the environment. Anything where we're saving money, being safer, able to iterate, it works. I don't think it's the end-all be-all solution for everything. I think it's weird to have an entire department dedicated to just in-camera VFX, because I think that that's like using a crane to crush a fly. Some scenes you don't need to do LED walls for. Even The Mandalorian overrepresents how much of it's done on LED wall. A lot of it's just traditional post-production. And they just don't want you to know that because everyone's trying to boost in-camera VFX and virtual production as a medium so that they'll get funding for it and they continue to play with their toys.
Other than getting to shoot in any location, what other benefits does virtual production bring to your stories? I
mean, it allows the actor to see the scene, right? You're giving visual confirmation. Sightlines could be, the sightlines are correct. It's the ability to illuminate the actors, right? So you don't have to worry about the chroma key. If they're on Mars, they're going to be, glowing red, so it all looks embedded as a final pixel. So it's great in that it's a self-illuminated surface that gives visual confirmation for actors to interact with.
Yeah, I actually did some stalking. I went to your Reddit AMA.
Yeah.
You talked about using technology creatively for storytelling. Like, why does gravity needs to be negative 9.8? Why not make it the opposite? Like, can you dive into that? How, not just virtual, but how not just how you can use a virtual production to shoot any location, but rather use it to fundamentally change stories.
Right. It allows you to experiment with all the things that can happen with interactive nature of a video game engine. When I started teaching the classes, my class, Virtual Production Development, which is a mocap-based class, we're using live mocap avatars and iPads as virtual cameras and making a movie together as 18 people in one classroom. When I started that class, Tisch was interested in getting their undergrad film students involved. And so we left 4 spots open for the first 2 years I taught that class for undergrad Tisch. So we had half ITP, half IDM, so half engineering, half Tisch ITP, and then those 4 undergrads. And it was really interesting working with the 4 undergrad film students because they knew the pain of lugging gear. They understood about permits. They understood about all the tediousness of traditional filmmaking, and all of a sudden they were just alleviated from having any of those responsibilities. And those are the ones who are like, well, why can't gravity be a different thing? Why can't I have a million lights? Because I don't have to worry about lugging them around myself. And they're the ones who intimately knew the pains of gear when they were just on a laptop. We're just the most experimental immediately.
Wow.
And then because of the generation where everyone has played, knows what WASD and first-person shooters are, they easily adapted to the game engine and were like, this is a medium that fits for me. So those are some of my favorite students.
Yeah. As a professor at NYU, you're constantly working with engineers and artists, creatives and artists. How do you see them differ, and how do you see them having similar traits?
We talk about this a lot. So there's a few ways to approach it, but of course it's going to be oversimplification. In general, let's say the artists at Tisch, they are creative. They know how to kind of tell stories already. They're more interested in learning the tech.
Right.
So oftentimes their classes are maybe a little more tech oriented. Whereas engineering students, they're sometimes they're already engineers. They know how to read a manual, but they need to understand conceptual development.
Right.
So at engineering, we have a class called ideation and prototyping, where we have the students bring a homework assignment every week, and then we slap it out of their hands and say, do it again in a different way. We teach them how to iterate, not to be precious with their ideas. Oftentimes, engineers, when left alone with their projects, will refine something till it's absolutely beautiful, but it could be a little sterile because it's just very clean and well made. Whereas when you work with artists, they're always iterating, and sometimes a project gets completely turned on its head from one week to the next because of their creative instincts.
Right.
And then those things can often be not very well made, right? They're slapped together with duct tape. But you put the two together, then you have a great project.
Right.
You have the people who are iterating, creating something that's so unique that even has like more market value because it is so unique. But yet a lot of times artists aren't very good at being entrepreneurial, but the engineers are. Having them together is two sides of one coin. It's
Wow.
having a tech director and a tech artist working side by side.
Yeah. Who's easier to work with, an artist or a technologist?
It all depends on what you're trying to get out of them. I mean, again, because they have their own strengths, you just have to know how to address them in different ways.
How do you work with them differently when teaching the students specifically?
Well, I'm not giving individualized lesson plans. Like my classes are usually half and half, but it's just knowing that that I need to tease the engineers to be more extroverted and actually put their hands on equipment.
Yeah.
Like they say, oh, I understand what a projector is. I'm like,
Right.
yeah, but have you hung a projector? And where the artists, it's about like, yes, I understand that you know how it could work, but does it work? Does it hit when you hit play? Does it actually do the thing? I understand conceptually you have an idea, but does it actually execute?
Great. So you're telling the artist, here are the limitations, but you're taking the technologist, go out there and explore.
Right, get out of the laptop,
Right.
actually do it, and that's why we've been having fun in our most recent class, which is the Amusement Park prototyping class, that we've been heavily influenced by our connections with the Disney Imagineering, is doing dioramas to understand scale and pacing of telling story. That's been fun because I didn't really realize it, but most rides, the majority of rides, are 5 minutes or less.
Okay.
And then how do you tell a story with movement in 3 to 5 minutes?
Yeah.
And building dioramas actually is incredibly helpful because their midterms are taking their phone and narrating a ride through a diorama, making sure that before they start the process of spending money in a marketplace and modeling out a scene, that they know that the story will fit within the time constraints.
Do you enjoy doing the tech side more, or do you enjoy doing the creatives more?
Two sides of one coin. They're both. I don't think I don't separate them.
You don't separate them?
No.
Okay. How do you make sure they work in conjunction? How do you make sure like students, the tech people and the creatives are working together well?
Well, I oftentimes assign groups. I make sure that all the groups are half and half, and that they can't flock together and separate out from each other. So, as soon as I started teaching in 2015, I've always done half and half, or whenever I can, and then I assign groups to make sure that they're working together, and then I help them assign roles, and and I let them know what do you want to do? Is it because do you want to hit a home run? Meaning, do you want to do something that you already know how to do and do it really well, or do you want to do something you don't normally do and be in charge of that and actually get some skills from there? So if like you're great at performing, maybe you don't want to perform this time because that's already what you know how to do. So it's helping them find out what the skills they already have and what they want to move forward with. Do they want to diversify their technology, or sorry, it's at the microphone. Do they want to diversify their technology, or do they want to be a master of something? And that's the difference between undergrad and graduate, is like when you finish a master's program, you should master something. You should be the person that people know to go to for something.
Right.
Like, oh, we're going to do this thing with this software. Oh, I know that woman, she does that. So it's I always warn people when they come to a graduate degree that obviously you're getting a master's degree, but you can be getting 3 different kind of degrees. If you just do a summary of everything, if you do, you're getting another undergrad, you're getting another general purpose degree. If you master something, you're getting a master's, and if you invent the new technology or if you invent the new library, then you're getting a PhD. Okay. So you can approach it many ways, but I always try to warn people who are just doing a survey of all the stuff that you don't need another undergrad degree, you need to master something before you finish.
Okay, speaking of education, can you tell us more about your educational journey? How did going to Emory and NYU shape you as a creative technologist?
Well, Emory was that was a lifetime ago. That was pre-med and evolutionary anthropology. I was dealing with growing up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and I wanted to embrace evolution, which is something that wasn't taught in schools. So that was kind of more reactionary towards growing up in the South. But the NYU obviously was very was a complete paradigm shift of the way I thought. There's a rumor or a myth or something that if you join the Navy SEALs, they break your hands because they grow back stronger and bigger or something like that. Even if it's not true, anecdotally, it's kind of the same as the first semester of going to a technology program where it just breaks your brain and you put it back together in a new way that was stronger and more perceptive than before. It's just making it through that first semester where like, I went to school when I was in my 30s, so I was like, maybe I'm an old dog that can't learn new tricks. But you really have this incredibly powerful shift of the way you perceive the world around you and the infrastructure of society and how things are actually made, and the understanding that all the cool people at all the cool jobs are probably in your alumni association because there's only so few places that do this creative tech kind of stuff. And so, it definitely was, I didn't understand programming that well, and it definitely terrified me that I wasn't going to learn it, and maybe it was I didn't fit into the program. But after finishing the first semester, I feel it just turned me into a new person. And in fact, some people quit at that point because that's all they need, is understanding society in a new way. But I stuck around and was able to become the person who used game engines to VJ concerts, and that's how I got into everything.
Okay. Can you explain what a creative technology does? What does their typical day-to-day look like?
It depends on if you work for yourself, if you're freelance, if you work for a big company. The role of creative technologist, I think, was tied into the web for a long time. So it was about full stack engineering, but obviously that definition has exploded in the last 5 years. It can be so. It depends on what role you're doing. And my experience, of course, has been more of a technical director, which means I am a gatekeeper to a project. I make sure that as my artists and other people who are creating assets or integrating those assets, I vet them and make sure that they actually work and that they don't need to be sent back and fixed. And so, in a way, I often say that my role on projects that are hugely visual, I don't put a pixel on the screen. I'm creating tools for artists to use so that they can put the pixels on the screen, and I'm keeping everything organized. I'm in charge of version control. I'm in charge of style guides. I'm in charge of things that maybe aren't as sexy, but it makes it work and makes the thing hum. So when you're working like on big projects, there is no it's done. Right? It's whenever the deadline is. So it oftentimes is 10, 14-hour days because you just want to make it look good because you don't know when the next thing is going to happen. I've never really worked for a big company. I've almost always been freelance. In fact, I've often been abused in that when people probably should have hired a small team, I just took the job myself and just did it all. So that could be a little much and be stressful. But yeah, so when you're in it and you're doing production, it's just long days of developing and deploying and communication, tons and tons of GChat and Slack messages to make sure everyone's on the same page. But more and more, I can't do that kind of stuff. I can't dedicate an entire day doing production, so I do technical consulting now. So I basically give office hours to projects.
How do you balance being an educator and taking on commercial work?
My priority is to the education, so that comes first, and everything else is gravy on top. So, when I'm developing, I do a lot with teaching. And not only do I teach at the graduate level at engineering, but I also develop a lot of curriculum for our online classes. So we've actually been supported by Epic Games to do virtual production curriculum online, and we have a 4-course track that we've been running for 3 years. That hundreds of people have taken from around the world. And so I'm also producing that kind of stuff as well, that many people who are students at NYU don't know that that's also my responsibility, is to develop that curriculum and see how 4 classes can tie to each other as a track that can be taken either separately or together. So the classes have to fit together in a certain way that there's minimal overlap, but you can also start from the beginning and work your way all the way through. So, doing that is, doing curriculum development is a big component of me. So I'm primarily a teacher now. I really only do like 4 hours of freelance consulting a week, and that's about it. I do know that eventually I will get back into that because first of all, there's more money in it, and there's more glory in that. But for right now, especially as this facility is finding its legs and had kind of pivoted during the pandemic from being a city-run venture to being an NYU administered facility, I still want to see this place. I've been invested in this place for 4 years. I want to make sure that it has its legs and can stand without me.
Right. I do want to talk about your Snapchat project.
Sure.
That's really cool. Can you tell us more about it, what it is, how you did it?
So we did I worked with Snapchat twice. The first was 7 days into the pandemic, that they had their developer upfronts. They call it the Snap Partner Summit. And they come out and they tell you all the things that they're going to be releasing within the next week or next month and year and whatever, and their roadmap, and a lot of patting themselves in the back. So it was supposed to be a live event. It was a live event that was actually going to be with Lux Machina was actually building all the LED stuff, and it was going to be on a stage and 1,000 people there, and they pivoted to wanting to do it as a virtual production. So a company called Tadon reached out to me through a mentor of mine, a guy named Mike Woods, and they said, "Hey, we hear that you might be able to pull this off." I'm in my sister's guest room in Virginia, and they're like, "Yeah, so we're going to shoot on a green screen with the C-suite team of Snapchat in LA, and we're going to do it as a virtual production." So I was teaching my first class on virtual production. It was called Emerging Technology and Storytelling or whatever. I was co-teaching with the cinematographer Bradford Young, actually, which was super fun. He did like Arrival and whatever, so he was my co-teacher for that class. And it pivoted into being a virtual production class, even though it's supposed to be a dialogue between a technical director and how they allow affordances for people in VR to frame scenes, and a cinematographer that actually frames scenes. So it was supposed to be this dialogue between cinematographer and technical director as people who give views into worlds. But then it turned into a virtual production class because we were all remote, and all the software and hardware is just where we could be. So I'd been learning a lot about version control, networking, sending show control over networks, using multi-user editing, and we were able to use all this technology, which really shaped my virtual production class. My virtual production class is how do you make Snapchat, and that's what most of my classes are. Is it's a breakdown of how I've done a successful project. So it has a way of it has a relevance, and it's like this is how you do it in real life. It's not hypothetical. This actually worked. And so I was on a Zoom call. Everyone was in their own office in the studio in LA, and they were leading in, one C-suite person at a time. We're using an in-cam system to shoot. They wanted it to look like the set to look like Venice Beach, where their first office was. So we recreated Venice Beach for Evan Spiegel, and we shot. And then we didn't do it live though. We recorded, and we had 11 days for post because they wanted to make it look nice and shadows on the ground and all that kind of stuff that we weren't really getting. But yeah, we learned a lot about we learned a ton about, we don't want to have to embed the presentations inside the game engine because it took too much time to replace it. So all the presentations were being streamed over NDI from one laptop into to a computer that we had. I was doing show control from Virginia. All this kind of stuff was all happening over networks, and it was about how we were very lucky that it was at a point when software and hardware was just good enough to be able to pull off this production. Wow. And so then they took all the footage, and then they had 11 days for post, and then put it out as like a live event. Okay. And then the second time we were able to go to XR stages or XR studios, JT Rooney's place in LA, and we were able to shoot it actually on an LED wall, which was like me live coding in front of 100 people watching me. So and that was like 16-hour days. I was like, yeah, can we not do overtime? I'd rather just go home.
So how do Snapchat filters actually work?
I have no idea. I just made their virtual production. I've actually worked with their development team, and I actually trained Snapchat internally. I actually ran my virtual production classes for their production team internally. I did a custom class for them, but I have no idea how the technology works. I mean, Lens Studio looks amazing, and people who use it say it's a fantastic piece of software.
Right.
And I know all the features from 2021 when I did the show with them, but I've never used it myself.
Yeah. So I need to talk about this with you, is motion capturing. You're an expert in motion capture.
Self-taught expert.
What is mocap?
Motion capture is, it's sub-millimeter accurate data collection of the human form. Mm-hmm. So you're in the case of this studio that we're in right now, we have 34 cameras shooting at 240 frames per second, shooting infrared, triangulating the position of little retro-reflective markers. So you're wearing tiny little mirrors all over yourself. You're defining joints and the way the joints bend, and you're solving for a skeleton. It doesn't know where your skeleton is, but it figures out where your skeleton is based off placement of markers. And so you're just doing motion acquisition or data acquisition.
That's what James Cameron used for Avatar.
Right.
Everyone in suits.
Right. The suits with the dots, starting with some of it was done for Titanic early on, some of the first motion capture. Right. Prior to that, a lot of it was just rotoscoping for motion acquisition. But by doing the dots, you're able to derive a 3D skeleton for Lord of the Rings, which I didn't have real-time playback yet, but then yes, Avatar, 1010, and it just exploded after that for doing mocap for film and TV. We do it mainly as performance art. Mm-hmm. We just like to do it for live events,
right?
And that's kind of how we did it. We bought our first mocap studio in 2015 for the Met Museum, where they had a statue of biblical Adam that had actually fallen and broken. So it was like 15 years ago. It took $6 million in 12 years to put it back together. The museum was open, but the security footage was only every 6 seconds. So the statue was up, next shot is down on the ground. The pedestal had buckled and given way. And so they had to scan it to put it back together, and this is what started the Met actually scanning all their stuff. So the Met's entire collection has been scanned now because of this project. Yeah. And when they scanned it to put it back together, they realized they had an avatar. So they want to do an activation to celebrate the return of Adam back to his pedestal. And so they worked with an artist named Reed Farrington, who is now currently the head of AV at the Met, based off this project, but he's previously been at the Whitney and at MoMA. And we did a really high-tech interactive kiosk around the statue that fell and was put back together. So you would go into the gallery, you'd see the statue of Adam, and then you'd see two 80-inch screens back to back, and you get to pick a piece, like, oh, I want the head or I want the right arm, and then these two performers would launch into these 5-minute vignettes where they talk about the history of where the marble came from, who was the artist, all this kind of stuff. And that we had a person playing the museum docent, the person who has all the facts. They had to basically memorize 100 pages of information to be accurate, and then you had a person in mocap that was 200 feet away in a mocap studio and behind the scenes who was there live performing. It could be a zany person that could travel to different locations and be whatever with live show control. Right. So that was a live show that was run morning, noon, and night for the month of July in 2015. So that very much, having Reed Farrington showing us how to do it with theater, really shaped how we did mocap and how we approach virtual production as more of a live experiential versus doing it for games or TV where you're recording and cleaning it up and doing a large post session. We were always doing it live and doing it as virtual production.
I have so many questions. What sort of challenges do you as a motion capture artist face when doing mocap? What are the technical limitations of motion capture?
The biggest issue with wearing the suits is that this system is called an optical system, right? It's using cameras to see these markers, and those markers can be occluded. So that's the first issue, is that sometimes actors are a little bit not as good at this, but dancers are very good at being aware of their bodies and knowing that certain motions won't register. The software is getting better and better, so there's object permanence when things are occluded, but still an issue of data cleanup when you're doing things, and you have partner dancing is really difficult. Or we did a mocap shoot for Greco-Roman style wrestling. Super hard to do because there's so much occlusion of markers. So that's the biggest consideration when you're performing for motion capture, and why we keep a roster of the people who we think are good, and so that we always bring them back. Because the first time you get a motion capture suit and you're actually driving your avatar live for the first time, that person's useless for an hour because they're just having fun. I could be a bird. Yeah, I could be a bird. Can I be a part of the system? Yeah, I can be a part of the system. And they're useless. So you need to get people who are not. So it's not so novel for them, and that they've been exposed to that. It's one of the reasons why when we actually do motion capture, we do not let the performer look at themselves. They're actually facing the director, and the director's looking at the avatar in the background, because otherwise all the motion is the actor looking at themselves on the screen, and then you have to go back and re-edit the head so it's not looking at the screen.
It's way too fun for them to look at themselves.
Right. So you have to not be has to not be interesting to them anymore, and so we've made it so that they're not allowed to see themselves.
I know there's something called the Move AI.
Yes.
What does the future of mocap look like?
Right. I am interested to know. I think that that's going to help democratize stuff. It's really interesting that it does fingers, which is super hard to do in these mocap systems. So I'm happy about that. Obviously, it's only going to get better and better.
Why is it so hard to do fingers?
Because the markers for the fingers are very small, so there's more chances of occlusion here. We have gloves, but it's using a secondary mocap system combined with the initial mocap system, so it becomes a harder pipeline to maintain over the course of a whole day of a shoot.
Right.
Same with adding in face with doing body mocap, but the Move AI seems to solve for that stuff. And yeah, it's only getting better. It's obviously right now it's real time is limited. It still takes 4 iPhones, right? So it's not free, but you know, if you have 4 iPhones that of iPhone 12 or later, it works well.
Yeah.
You're still paying for the stitching in the cloud, but I think that this stuff is going to become.
Yeah.
There's already has been mocap using webcams and stuff like that. So it will democratize it, let more people be able to do it. I still think as a sub-millimeter accurate measurement tool, the big systems will still exist.
Right.
For health and wellness, for doing biomechanics, it'll still exist in this form.
It's just more accurate.
It's more accurate,
More
and if
control.
you're thinking about it as a documentation tool, right? So not only is this for performance and for entertainment, but you're recording movement that might not exist in 10 years.
Okay.
We have tons of people who have Tai Chi masters that are in their 80s that they want to record their movement because they're the only ones who know how to do this certain kind of thing. Think about all the indigenous dance that's been lost to the ages that we don't have any recordings of. We did volumetric capture with Mikhail Baryshnikov, one of the most famous male dancers in the world. Of course, now he's 75. We did volumetric with him. I would have loved to get him in 1983 when he was doing the highest leaps in ballet at the time. It's lost to the ages. It's not been archived. So this as an archival tool, I think, is really, really interesting. And to be able to like say, oh, this performer is no longer with us, but we can take this movement and we can somehow create some sort of three-dimensional experience of that and see it again.
So nowadays, can you just take a video of them, and then from that video you can get the motion capture?
You can. What's actually fun is there is a software called Radical Motion that we worked with a lot during the pandemic for our mocap classes that uses a webcam, or you can just upload video. And I've been able to get mocap of like Buster Keaton movies. So then you have a Buster Keaton or a Charlie Chaplin thing in 3 dimensions that you can actually then reskin and watch it in VR and walk around it.
Wow.
So you do need more than one reference video for accuracy, so it doesn't understand scale otherwise. It just thinks things are taller or smaller from one perspective, but at least with 2 perspectives you can understand.
There's the
reference.
big artificial intelligence hype nowadays. And how does that work with motion capture?
Well, the AI can do predictive, right? It understands where people are moving to. So it can help. It's what helps drive these motion capture systems that are markerless. It's Move AI or Capture or whatever they are. They're doing predictive motion capture, understanding where the frame will go, which is the same thing that you can do for video compression, understanding where pixels are moving to, and you can heighten video compression because of that. The H.264 was actually developed with a Tadon engineering professor.
H.264?
MP4 compression.
Right.
What is used for media server playback.
Right.
It uses the least amount of keyframes, therefore has the smoothest playback.
That's what I use to render all my...
Right. So that's
films.
Handbrake or whatever, yeah.
H.264.
So now you're moving to H.265, which can do higher resolution, and then H.266 is already out. It just hasn't been adopted.
So speaking of all these technical terms and all this technology, you're a self-taught motion capture. How did you teach yourself all this stuff?
So I wasn't 100% self-taught. So we had so when we got the studio, we reached out to a gentleman named A. Thomas Goldberg, who now lives in Vancouver, but is actually from Long Island. He was Ken Perlin's first artist in residence at NYU at the Quran Institute. And he came from the circus background and knew how to program lights and stuff. And he has been working in motion capture. He's been working on Gears of War and all sorts of stuff. He came in for 2 weeks and sat with me, and he taught me Unreal Engine and mocap for 2 weeks.
Wow. And
then he came back halfway through the project of the Met, which was 6 months of development, and did another 2 weeks with me, and then 2 weeks before we went live. So I did get training one-on-one from somebody.
Right.
But again, what he knew was more traditional AAA gaming, and I knew more about VJing live concerts. So there was a two-way way of information sharing, because I showed him how to do show control and how to do live events, and which now is kind of he now works with a circus in mocap in Vancouver, and doing live show control stuff.
Yeah, self-teaching is very difficult. I try to teach myself how to code, started with Python. It was the most difficult few months of my life.
Yeah.
So any tips for self-teaching this type of technology? Because I bet you had to teach yourself a lot of this stuff.
Right. When I started Unreal Engine, there was no YouTube channels for it.
Yeah.
Zero, because it was incredibly cost-prohibitive software. 2-3 months into doing Unreal, they finally went free. Beforehand, it wasn't. It wasn't free. They went down to $99 a month, $49 a month, and then they refunded the money I spent on Unreal Engine, which made me a customer for life. And then I had to teach myself because there were no YouTube channels, because there was no forum post. Because if you had an issue with Unreal Engine, you had to hire a consultant, and like hell, you're going to share that information for free to somebody else. So that's why Unity was much more widely adopted for the creative coding community, because it always had a free version since 2016 or 2006, and therefore there was a big forum community around it. But so Unreal was a lot of like bashing my head against the wall. I understood coding processes, and luckily Blueprints in Unreal Engine is a didactic form of learning C++. Blueprints are not abstracted in the way that they don't make sense. Like some node-based software, the nodes are arbitrarily named, but blueprints are actually functions and methods and data types of actual C++. So after learning blueprints, probably the hard way and the wrong way, I'm able to pseudocode entire C++ applications with people based off of me blueprinting in my head, and they don't even know that I don't understand C++ syntactically.
Wow.
That in its own way, I find Unreal useful for teaching C++. And so I was able to sell it to the NYU as like, let's go all in the software, because we're learning graphics programming at a lower level than you could approach. You can only get so far with doing C++ by itself without having some sort of framework on top of it that goes a little better. But so yeah, but the most important thing, and this is for technologists and artists, is a deadline. And so if you're working on Python, you need to be very rigorous about, I need to have this lesson plan done by this week, and that lesson done by the next week. That's like one of our famous quotes for the first piece we did for Sundance. The best thing you can give an artist is a deadline. Then it'll be done. And then the higher the stakes, the more you're invested in there. So when students are like, when am I going to be ready to do a client project? I'm like, do a client project, and then you'll know if you're ready. Like you need to understand the difference between doing a homework assignment and a client deliverable. Getting 100 or an A in a homework assignment is not an A for a client deliverable. They want even more. So you have to go out there, and they're going to give you deadlines, and they're going to, I tell a lot of my students who go off to do really high pressure jobs, there will be that day you hide under your desk, and you don't want anyone to find you because you promised something you don't know how to do, or you can't deliver. And I've slowly gotten little pings back from my former students who go off the world like, yep, I had that day today. I hid under my desk today. You told me it was going to happen, and it happened. We had the producer came through, and my virtual camera tracking wasn't working, and I just hid.
Do you remember your first client job?
The first client job, well, I was a videographer before I went back to grad school, so I've been doing like weddings and events. So I've been working as a freelance with clients for a while. My first creative coding project was when I worked for Light Harvest Studio. This guy, Ryan Uzalewski, who runs it, had come into my video sculpture class and given a lecture on his projection mapping projects and said, I'm looking for people who understand Cinema 4D After Effects pipeline, and I had been dabbling with that for 10 years. So I said, I'll try. And the first day he says, okay, well, you're here, I don't really have a budget. I have a budget for certain tasks. If you do these tasks, I'll pay you for what those tasks are, but I can't just like pay you a salary for being here because I don't know what you know. And so the first thing he said was, okay, this building no longer exists, but there's a place called the IFC building in Dumbo on Jay and John Street, which was the Made in New York Center. They had a panoramic projection screening room where every Made in New York project was screened, and the Gotham Awards were held. And they needed to do a 7-projector blend, so the idea was this idea of expanded cinema, that things could be on the screen room inside, and then that content can escape the theater and then wrap around the entire room. And so every screening would have an experiential component to it as well. And so Ryan said, here's the CAD file for the floor for the building. There's the room. If you can figure out the projection study, I'll pay you $600. And I figured it out in 2 hours. And he's like, well, I guess I'm paying you $600 right now. So it was understanding the fact that it was just trigonometry, and that there's like a 7th grade teacher's right angle calculator that I have bookmarked that I still use for projection studies.
Okay. How much math do you need for
Just trig. You have to understand, throw distance. The fact that these things there's inverse square law around light, so light has a fall off. So you have projector has to be a certain distance, but they have different lenses that can focus the light. So wide angle could be closer, telephoto could be further back and still have the brightness. So you just need to understand this. I guess that's algebra, and then trigonometry for understanding the frustum of cameras and projectors.
Okay. That light fall is a very important concept. Could you explain what that is?
Light gets absorbed. Light has like a distance it can travel before it. Like if you have a candle, it only is bright around the candle. It doesn't have as much brightness further away. So that follows what's called the inverse square law. So it's like a logarithmic fade away from it's not linear. It falls off quicker than a linear fall off.
The closer you are to the light source, the quicker it falls off.
Right. Yeah. There's an attenuation to it.
Right.
So right next to the source, it's 100% bright, and when you get further away, it's a fraction of what that is.
Right.
And that's what projection is understanding how to deal with lumens and the fall off, and then using multiple that blend together seamlessly that are different angles that aren't one. This projector over here is brighter than the other one, and understanding how to dial those in and out.
So you're a lifelong Unreal user now.
Yeah. Since 2014, so almost 10 years.
Why is it free? Why is it accessible?
Well, it's not free. It's you pay at a certain level, right? If you make a game and you make what is it, 85 grand, then you owe them a percentage of that, which is not insignificant. But they want you to be successful before you have to pay. For what we do with art, I haven't read the EULA in a while, but I think it's just 100% free. If you don't keep score, Unreal is 100% free to use.
Wow. What are the most interesting projects you've done on Unreal?
I'd say that the most interesting projects I've done in Unreal would be, I've kind of just talked about them. I definitely think that some of the VR projects were really interesting that I've done with festivals, because really small teams working on these things. There are special effects movies that have to be rendered at 2 or 3 screens at one time at 90 frames per second. It's the deepest engineering. I put something in the Oculus store, and it was the most engineering I've ever had to learn. It was me over a spring break pulling all-nighters. Like, you tell Oculus it's ready, like, hey, it's ready, test it, and they'll send 150 people into your experience that are just trying to break it. Like, this person, then you get a spreadsheet, right? And like, this person said that there's an ankle that twists a little bit in a crowd sequence 100 miles away. I'm like, well, why the fuck were they looking at that? That's their fault. Like, watch the goddamn story, so it was super difficult, and I was definitely, and then not only that was I was supposed to, so that was for the Oculus CV1, so the 6 degree of freedom headset, but I was also supposed to port that to the Oculus Go, so a 3 degree of freedom experience, and I didn't have the Oculus Go, and I didn't know what the performance specs were for it, and Oculus was like, yeah, sure, we'll pay you for doing the thing in the store, and then also for the port for the Go, and the project will be released with the Go, and I was like, okay, that's a thing, and then I was like, how many people have actually ported projects? Like, oh, no one has, but you said you could do it. I'm like, you told me I could do it. I didn't know I couldn't do that. So unfortunately, that became a 360 video export, and it wasn't actually live game engine stuff.
How do you approach storytelling in virtual reality?
Well, the first thing you always ask is, does this need to be VR?
Okay.
When VR first came out, the film world was worried that VR was going to replace cinema or whatever. In the history of cinema, I'd say only a few pieces should have been VR. Like maybe pieces that are all in one room, like 12 Angry Men or something. But in the history of VR, most of it should have been movies. And it was inappropriate use of the technology.
Right. I've seen some virtual reality short films on YouTube. I'm like, that could have been done in the film. Like, it just makes it a lot more confusing. Because because I think in cinema, a lot of it's directing the eyes, where the viewers see. In VR, it's a lot harder to control that.
Because the person's the camera, you can't frame it. And that's why I had that whole class with Bradford Young. It was like, you're framing it, I have to let people understand. I have to give them affordances to find the framing, right? So I have to, if I want to look over here, I need to put a sound over there, or I need to figure out a transition. I have to have something go over here to lead their head. So there's a lot of UX within VR that gets very complicated. It's very tightly organized and choreographed, and that deep understanding you can't be taught really. You have to just do it and make the mistakes, and that's why a lot of beginning VR pieces are just technical demos. People are just trying to understand.
And I think it's a completely different art form than traditional cinema.
It's a different medium, and that's what people don't understand.
It's not going to replace movies.
Right. It can enhance. It can be another part, but it's not replacing it. It's a different thing. And then I haven't really watched that much VR recently, but from my understanding, still some of the best VR pieces were made at the very beginning when there was big budgets behind VR. The things that the Oculus Story Studio did, like I still think Dear Angelica is one of the best pieces, and that was 2017 at this point, and so that's 6 years old, but I still recommend it for my current classes because I still think it's one of the best use cases of scale and surrounding people with information and guiding people's eyesight to certain locations.
Yeah. How do you see creative technology changing the future of content the next 5 to 10 years?
Everything is being moved to real time. It's a still huge shift in way of thinking. A lot of people who are incredibly technologically advanced, who are at more traditional places like Pixar or ILM, they don't know real time. This is still a huge movement, and understanding that mindset. It's a lot of the people I teach in my online classes for workforce development is people who are trying to do that thing I said that happened to me in my first semester, breaking their brain and rethinking of how they do stuff. Like traditional VFX people do simulations to, like if you're going to do rain, you actually make rain, and then you don't have to worry about the performance because you're going to render it offline.
Right.
Game engine artists don't make rain. If there's a window, you just take a normal map and you scroll the normal mappings down, and it deforms the thing. And you're like, I'm not going to simulate it. I'm going to come up with a different way of thinking that helps me maintain my performance. So I still think that other people are catching up with the real-time revolution, and that's still going to suss itself out in the next 5 years. But again, it's more, there's more interactivity, there's more individualized storytelling, there's more biofeedback.
Right.
It knows if you want to have something exhilarating or something calming, you could be watching the same thing your partner's watching, but you're getting two different stories. So more individualized based off of people's attitudinal states, or biofeedback and stuff.
Right. That's what I'm really curious about. Is what does the future entertainment look like from a consumer perspective?
Unfortunately, it means getting even more choices.
Unfortunately.
Just like there's already too many TV shows, and we can't all keep up with it. And not to be wax nostalgic, but there was a fun thing when there was only 3 broadcast networks and everyone watched the same thing. And everyone watched the season finale of MASH last night, and everyone could talk about it. Now, you don't have those numbers, that critical mass behind individual broadcasts outside of like the Super Bowl. You don't that half the people at work the next day all saw it, kind of thing.
Are there any favorite TV shows you're watching right now?
I love the first 3 seasons of Succession. I have to start the 4th one. I find it highly amusing after having 4 years of a weird political party in charge of the country to actually be watching a TV show where I'm rooting for Republicans. It's like, wait, I'm being tricked to like these people. But yeah, it's savagely funny, and and just even the theme song is awesome. So enjoyed that one. I enjoy watching Our Flag Means Death. I don't know if you saw that one, but it's like a pirate virtual production where they're on a boat, but the boat is just set in front of an LED wall.
Right.
It's a pretty crazy, funny.
1981.
No, this is current. It stars.
I'm talking. There's a TV show called like 1989 or something.
Oh! You mean the historical drama? Yeah, right. Yeah. I haven't watched those yet, but this one. It's who's the director of Thor? What's his name? New Zealand guy. He did the What We Do in the Shadows. He was directed the first initial one, and then he did Jojo Rabbit.
He's the director of Jojo Rabbit.
Anyway, he's the star of this Our Flag Equals Death, or Our Flag Means Death. Yep. Taika Waititi, yeah. He plays Blackbeard. It's a great character. Yeah, you should definitely watch it. And it's a virtual production.
Wow.
It was definitely something that wasn't on my radar. It just like kind of showed up like, oh, this is a really interesting show. But I don't know. I often just watch. I veg out to comedies, just like what's on a late night show or whatever.
Yeah. Right now, for me, watching movies is like a chore because I make movies, and sometimes if I just enjoy something, I put on like John Wick.
Right.
That's when I eat and I watch and I'm just relaxing. I can talk with my roommates.
Right. You get to check out a little bit. Yeah. It's like when I waited tables, in undergrad. I couldn't go out to restaurants anymore because I was too observant of what was happening outside in the restaurant. Like, oh, that person messed up that order, and that person's not washing their hands correctly. Like, I was too hyper aware of the surroundings, so like being a server ruined my restaurant experience. And so it's like, working in movies, you're like, I can't turn off my brain.
So you have a background in filmmaking, screenwriting, data analytics, market research, and now you're a creative technologist. For the people who are for those who are just starting off with like Unreal Engine, virtual production, or just wanting to be a creative technologist, what kind of advice do you have for them?
Get a good computer. That's pretty much it. That's the biggest hurdle for learning the Unreal Engine. I still think Unity is probably an easier game engine to learn to start off with because it is very simple. You don't have to worry about little tiny scripts, not compiling an entire engine. What you see is what you get. If you start off with a scene, you put a box in there, you got a box. Unreal open up, you have an interactive day-night cycle that you can't parse if you're just now opening up an engine for the first time. I see a lot of students who will do Unreal Engine, not have a computer that can run it really well, and then get frustrated with it and then quit because the user experience was poor. So I'm one of the teachers that they'll come to my class and they'll know that I'm the guy who's going to say, get a computer. Yeah, like especially if you're going to pay the exorbitant cost of going to NYU, just a little bit more, get you a computer. You'll have it for 3-4 years. It'll be the thing you use every single day. And so get a good computer, and then figure out what you want to make with it, and have a project. Whether it's something that's going to be outwardly facing or inwardly facing, like make sure it has some sort of you have some sort of ownership over it. Like when I first learned Unity when I was in school, I had one of those lynda.com, LinkedIn Learning, like your guide to learning Unity 4.1 or whatever. I didn't make what they made. I made my own thing. And that way you own the lessons more. By not doing literal verbatim copy paste, they click, I click. Make your own thing. Therefore, you have to make more connections and understand conceptually what they're trying to do. And
so you start with a project, then you learn doing your own project.
Yeah. So I made Castaway, the video game. So I was learning how to throw Wilsons and making my own fire, and I made an island. So I made a game around Tom Hanks' movie. For my thesis for ITP, I was actually I had 2 other projects I was debating about doing. One of them was to recreate Groundhog Day as a video game, or to make a real-time Trans-Siberian Express train ride using real-time geospatial data being fed into the game engine. I chose neither of those, but that's the kind of stuff I like doing, making film adaptations with using video game engines.
And you feel a lot more motivated to work on your own projects.
Yeah, because it's funny and I'm making my own thing.
And consistent.
Yeah, it's like, they're like, oh, like you do a project that's like, they're like, oh, we're using this green little alien, we're making an alien shooter. I'm like, I don't want to make an alien shooter. I want to do something that's funny. And so make your own project, and that way you learn a little bit more by connecting the dots yourself.
Right. That's kind of been my experience learning Maya, is I just follow whatever the tutorial says, but
that's useful as a reference guide, but that's not going to sustain you for a long-term project.
Absolutely.
That's why I first initially learned 3D, was by like, here's how we're going to model this one character, and like you don't care about the character, therefore it's kind of hard to follow through. But if you use the lessons that they're teaching, but make your own thing, you're more invested in it.
Well, do you have any advice for people who want to become very successful creative technologists?
There's so many ways to do it. It's definitely, you need to keep up to speed with what's happening around you, right? It is moving very rapidly, so leverage, the community, leverage, Twitter used to be great for this, but Twitter's been kind of ruined in the last 6 months. But you need to keep up to speed with what's happening. So that's why your CES, your NABs, your film festivals are useful for you to help. It's not only about understanding the tech, but it's also about being a person that people want to work with. Once you do your first few projects that are successful, you don't need a demo reel anymore. You don't need a resume anymore. People just find you. And I've already seen this with students who have graduated, who do like one big project, and I look at their websites and it's still referencing like their second semester of school, and they haven't even updated it with their thesis work. Because all it takes is that one project. So just work hard, be a good person, and the people will want to work with you and continue to work with you. So, and I have people who have literally pitched and won projects that were just around wanting to hang out with their friends. That's like how Adam Sandler works, right? He just like wants to hey, let's go to Hawaii for 6 weeks with my best friends. Oh, okay, let's write a shitty movie about it. It's kind of like how we do things. It's like, hey, I really want to do live mocap performance art for whatever. And that's where, like, Jose Cuervo was like, Jose Cuervo didn't want a live motion capture performance art party. We wanted to have a live performance art project, and we pitched it to Jose Cuervo, and then they threw the party for us and paid us to do it with them. So it's just, it's finding the people you like to work with and figuring out ways to push yourself.
Well, yeah, let's wrap this up before I still have a few questions about virtual production. What are the common misconceptions about virtual production? And as a filmmaker who's never done it before, how do you start?
It really is understanding the different forms of virtual production, understanding like that virtual production isn't just in-camera VFX. That's the biggest misconception that a lot of schools are running off of, and that you have to have an LED wall to do virtual production. You can do virtual production with a laptop, your phone. We did it over the pandemic with just things on our shelves. It's not like, oh, we have to spend $500,000 before we can start. You can start with just a computer. The game engine's free. Dive in there. It's about telling stories. So learn how to use a game engine as a nonlinear editor. And so that's the main thing, is understanding that mocap is virtual production, and that virtual production works in, again, theme park entertainment and in simulation and training. It's much broader than just making a TV show, and there's different ways to approach it, and there will continue to be even more ways of utilizing virtual production. It's just a way of rapid prototyping that could be useful for any industry. And so I think that if you get a philosophy degree, you should understand virtual production of philosophy. If you're getting an anthropology degree, what is virtual production of anthropology? There's a way of approaching it that you can integrate it into everything. Game engines connect the entire world together. They're not just for gaming. They just, we can connect a toaster with a PlayStation controller, because game engines can pull it off. So it's just understanding that fluency and how it can be used for everyday life as you move forward. So that's like the biggest misconception, is that it takes a lot of money, and that it is just an LED wall. Like if you want to do in-camera VFX, you can pull it off with rear projection. You can do it with a large TV. There's ways of getting in there to understand the workflow.
Yeah, and then for the filmmakers who want to start with virtual production, what kind of advice would you give them?
Learn how to make traditional films first. Right? You don't, again, virtual production is just a tool. And it could be something that you utilize a lot, but I don't think you're ever going to make something that's 100% virtual production, or you need to at this point. That might actually be more of a limitation. Yeah. So just, again, we now, almost everyone has smartphones, and smartphones have high-resolution cameras. Just learn how to make a movie and edit, and understand pacing and of editing, and how to set up shots. And so traditional filmmaking still applies. You can still take all those great textbooks and utilize them for understanding how to do shot, reverse shot. You still have to know that before you can open up a game engine and make a movie.
Right.
And that's where sometimes I find limitations with the creative technologists, like people from IDM or IDP, is that they don't know traditional filmmaking, but they understand game engines, and they're crossing the 180 line and all the other kind of stuff that's like ingrained in your first light and sound class.
Learn how to tell a story first, then worry about getting into virtual production.
Right.
Awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to touch on?
No, it's just I've loved combining movies and game engine technology for a while, and so I find the two super informative for each other. I definitely love when they cross over and you have things like, what is it called, the hardcore Henry or whatever, like where it's basically a POV video game. I like when these things merge. When we study VR, I used to have a lecture on movies that take place in one room, because you don't need to change locations all the time for VR. That's out of scope oftentimes. When I teach virtual production for filmmaking now, my virtual production development class, I teach long takes. We review famous long takes that we can now pull off seamlessly inside of virtual environments, and we watch movies together. I think that virtual production still is storytelling through filmmaking, and it's just, again, remember that it's one brush in your palette that you have.
For sure. And lastly, what are some of the most exciting developments in virtual production that you're excited about?
The biggest one, of course, is being able to do infinitely scalable media servers with game engines. That's the in-display stuff. That's just a huge game changer that I don't think a lot of people even understand how important that is. Again, it's about the fact that you can, hook up 400 different computers, and they can all render a single image, continuous image. And that's just a huge breakthrough, again, using a game engine as a media server, where it used to be that that's not how you use game engines. Game engines are for making a game to a single screen at 120 frames per second. To have this gen lock between multiplayer game engines, I still think that people don't realize how important that is and how big of a game changer that is. Probably because it's really expensive. You have to have a Quadro card in your computer. Therefore, to even mess around with the stuff, you have to have $40,000 worth of gear to understand what it's doing under the hood. But I still think that's still incredibly revolutionary. And really just expanded the whole world of real time. Like when I first got into projection mapping, it was always pre-rendered because it was such a large scale, it was so many pixels, and now we can do that with game engines, and that's just so much more exciting. Mm-hmm. So even though it's still not a brand new thing on the horizon, I still think that's probably the most important development was this in-display technology.
Cool. Well, that's been it for
the
WLab'ing Podcast, our very first episode with Todd Bryant.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, I feel like we should go, catch a wave now.
Yeah, let's go catch a wave.
Cool. You did a great job.
All right, let's cut, guys. Oh my gosh, how long was that?